If you minia. Long live Ghana, man. Long live a baby, man.
One time. So come go to Jenny Mumpire. So come from we are fire. I'm ready, but to you. Ghana, man, but to you. When me free Ghana, me man penny a wodi kanu your friend on Dr. Nkrumah. Me mini say na woni my dear na boy your mama. Asemba coupe bi na me nte ya eya me nwanwa. Here ono na je fan hu die. Ye na raya sasenie eya body de ma ye. Moja na no hwe gunya de to ho ma ye. Edru me ne wo to say ye be ye bi ato aso. Tie Ghana de be ye me ne wa. Ye me ne odi na me ye me ne odi a o. Wo so no bi anya bi o. Enjankei omwa didiana anam process say obi anewo enani ejana enti yemfezi kan ton safangu from na mo frayina kom na yento jomo kanfo ye hu say ye kan na no mo da bi enso wugidi bidi won sam ye nu ne didi Ghana city obi apebi yenti na to ye ni greedy abra janka biti baby ananka wo ko suku ibia e bia ko bi ni mi bia wo ya we na wasu onya twene hu ti ma ba ko yente twa to sana nkuti e kan so wo ko parliament akona ko anazo say mundu to me kam ko to ma power me fa janka ko ya ba wana say masa bibia wo me fa ngo shabon sam tawa anya sana koti power when one go try a bank power when me nyansa se enye ba na ye kasa kwa meyi ye ya don in power ye muntie Ghana man you pana edie meyi ya me ni odia o Ghana meyi ya me ni odia.
This is actually the first interview of 2022 for Diaspora Network Television. So I
am honored.
I would like to take the opportunity to welcome my brother Rutendo Martinyarare. How are you?
I'm great, brother. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. Well, whenever I get you on, you live in South Africa, but the subject matter is Zimbabwe. So let's talk Zimbabwe. What's going on right now?
Well, Zimbabwe is growing. The economy is growing. A lot of infrastructure being built by the president. And the economy, I think, is currently one of the fastest growing economies in the Southern Hemisphere and in Africa. So that is very good. That is very positive for us. On the issue of sanctions, we got the UN involved. They made a ruling that the sanctions are illegal. They are violating human rights and persecuting civilians, which in reality, that can actually be defined as a crime against humanity. So that legal ruling by the UN is a very big development for us. So as a country, we're now looking at pushing a bit more in terms of pressuring the West to follow their own laws, rule of law, which the special rapporteur for the UN said was absent in their sanctions because they never tried anybody, but they were punishing people with sanctions, yet they did not have jurisdiction or courts that have the right to be trying people on an international legal space. So it's a good thing, and we're trying to use that to our advantage. However, we began to see a lot of pressure upon Zimbabwean migrants or immigrants and refugees that have been displaced into the SADC region. We've got South Africans complaining about the fact that Zimbabweans are competing for jobs with their people, which is true. And so they want Zimbabweans gone. We've also got the same problem in Botswana, Zambia, and we believe it's a concerted effort to try and undertake a strategy that is being employed by the West to try and push the SADC countries to put sanctions on Zimbabwe, to block their biggest export, which is human talent, and basically to force those people back to Zimbabwe so that they will be forced to vote for MDC in the next elections. And we are saying to SADC that once you do that, you've basically imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe in the same way that the West has done. Once you target our biggest export, that's what you've done. Yet we're almost at the end of the sanctions regime, which have been deemed illegal. And if we put pressure and unite as a SADC region, we could probably get rid of these sanctions in a very short space of time because the West have to remove their sanctions because they are illegal at international law. Okay. And so with our neighbors behaving like this, it's beginning to become questionable as to why. Rumors are that the United States CIA released $170 million to actually ensure regime change in Zimbabwe through destabilization. And we are trying to get the SADC countries to understand that you've lost a lot due to these sanctions. But we are at a point where the resolution that empowered the special rapporteur to come to Zimbabwe to assess the impact of sanctions actually allows us to seek reparations from the sanction senders and from those who implemented sanctions, so that those countries that have supported Zimbabwe, those countries that have been inundated by refugees, can actually get restitution and reparation and damages for supporting Zimbabwe over 20 years of illegal sanctions. So there's a lot happening in the Southern African region at this particular point. There's also by-elections that are happening because of the split in the opposition party MDC. We had a challenge in court, or in the constitutional court, of the constitution, or how the new MDC was constituted after the death of Morgan Tsvangirai. And the Chamisa faction lost because they hadn't followed process, they hadn't followed their own constitution. And now we're seeing by-elections to try and sort out the issues of parliamentarians that were displaced in the separation of the party. So that's also a very interesting leg in the Zimbabwean affair.
Let me touch on something you just said, that Zimbabwean workers are pretty much out-competing their hosts in Botswana, South Africa, and other southern countries. And as a result, those hosts want Zimbabweans gone. It seems to me that fellow Africans persecuting fellow Africans. So why blame the West about it? You said it was a concerted effort by the West. This seems to me it's Africans on Africans. Why blame the West?
Well, it's everything is ultimately linked to the West, especially when it comes to divisions and impact. The SADC region has been able to tolerate Zimbabweans for the past 20 years. In fact, they have supported Zimbabweans in the past 20 years. They've gotten our legal and illegal immigrants coming into their countries, and they've been able to work with those immigrants. However, because of COVID, there's been economic downturns. There's been economic downturn ever since 2008 in most parts of the world, and many parts of the world haven't recovered. So that pressure is now what's making South Africans talk to their government to say, we can't get jobs because there's jobs that we can do that are being done by Zimbabweans, which is a very valid point. However, the way that it is now being put into the public domain, the hate speech and the campaign that is against Zimbabwe is actually being funded and is being driven by anything other than the narrative of, or an organic narrative, or the narrative of the natives. And that is because of the negative publicity that is being pushed by the media, that is being paid. The person that actually told me about this campaign is actually a person in the media that was offered money to be part and parcel of this de-campaigning process of Zimbabwe, and he refused. So there is a concerted effort by the media and by people that are paying these medias to advance a narrative that demonizes Zimbabweans and separates Zimbabweans from their South African counterparts, who we have a relationship with, going for thousands, if not hundreds, for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. So that's how we know that it is being fomented by outsiders. However, let me say this before I end. We also have to take responsibility as Africans, that if we're going to be divided by outsiders, something that has happened on the African continent since we started selling slaves of our own people, then we haven't learned anything from history, and we have to take blame.
Okay, very good. You mentioned that recently the United Nations ruled that the sanctions against Zimbabwe are illegal. First, when did they do that, and what's the significance of that ruling?
Right. A special rapporteur came in October 2001 on the invitation of the Zimbabwean government. So basically, the Zimbabwean government gave the story and complaint that sanctions are affecting the lives of Zimbabweans. Now, the UN and the UN Human Rights Council have a number of resolutions against the use of coercive economic measures or sanctions that are used by other nations. And there is actually a resolution that I think is called 4420, it's called 44215 of 1989. It actually denounces Western countries and particularly former colonial powers utilizing economic sanctions to influence the policies of sovereign nations that have just come out of colonialism. And so part and parcel of that, they created other resolutions. There was one that was made in Vienna in 1994. There was another one that was then made in 2014. And then the eventual one, which is the resolution 3413 that was made in 2017, actually came up with a policy framework to deal with the issue of coercive economic measures, talking about the illegality, denouncing them, reminding people of former policies that start all the way with the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of the bringing down of colonialism in 1960. Those were then reinforced by this policy and resolution that was created in 2017 that created the Office of the Special Rapporteur for the Negative Impact of Sanctions, so that she could go around the world, measure the impact of sanctions, come back and give a report to the UN. And then the countries that are under those sanctions would be asked to seek reparations for these crimes against humanity and these sanctions that deprive civilians of enjoyment of their human rights.
Okay.
So they came in October, undertook an impact assessment, and made a report that says that these sanctions are illegal, depriving people of the enjoyment of their human rights and displacing these refugees that have become a problem in the region.
Right. So since the UN made that ruling, what has changed?
Right. So after making the ruling, even before the ruling, it's weird that you and I had a conversation with somebody from America. And I think a month after you and I had a conversation with this individual, we actually saw the American Congress contact the Zimbabwean government and say that their subcommittee on global human rights, health, and organization were going to start undertaking their own impact assessment on sanctions they've said don't exist. So they have acknowledged that these sanctions could be affecting people, and they want to measure the impact of those sanctions on human rights, health, and not only in Zimbabwe, but the whole of Africa. So it's very interesting that that development happened after our conversation, because it's a very significant step. And the Congress informed the Zimbabwean Pollard that they are doing this with the intention of removing sanctions. And
well, it sounds to me that's delaying tactics because if the United Nations has done its own impact assessment and submitted report, are they saying that the United Nations report was inadequate, so they have to do their own?
No, the American one came before.
Okay.
So you and I spoke in March, and in July, the United States Congress came before the UN came in October and said that they want to do an impact assessment of the sanctions. Very interesting development. And I think what makes the development interesting is that the person we were talking to actually has very great influence on Congress. And so possibly some work happened behind the scenes. And that's thanks to you. That's thanks to you. Yeah, because I think in our conversation, we did talk about the fact that the United States had not done in any impact assessment for 20 years of their sanctions in Zimbabwe and in other places in Africa. So something from that conversation clearly caused a change for the first time in 60 years of independence in Africa for the Americans to say, maybe let's start measuring the impact of our sanctions on human beings.
And you believe that the move came after our conversation?
I'm almost guaranteed.
Okay.
I believe that your wonderful guest went and had some conversations with some important people who made the decision, and it is a humanitarian decision. So by the time that the UN came, there was already an impact assessment being done by the United States. And that is Congress. You see what I mean? Yes. That is Congress. And that particular impact assessment is still ongoing. I was asked to contribute a document by the Pollard, which is a body that was created of all people that have contested presidential elections in Zimbabwe. They've created a body called Pollard. And that Pollard was being seen as illegitimate by the political players in Zimbabwe. But when the United States Congress approached Pollard, it actually gave the body a lot of legitimacy and basically gave this picture of democracy in which there's inclusive leadership in our country with the opposition and the president, which is brilliant. And then after that, in October, that's when the UN came in. Yeah, and that was also on the government of Zimbabwe.
And this all happened. This all happened in 2021.
This all happened in 2021 in a period of less than 4 months.
That's great. So Africans in the diaspora played a huge role in the fight against apartheid, as you know. I think what Zimbabwe is going through is similar, if not worse, and it's endured for quite a while. What can Africans in the diaspora do to help accelerate this process to remove the sanctions from Zimbabwe?
That's a good question, but before I answer it, I need to qualify that Africans could not help Zimbabwe for the past 20 years because Zimbabweans themselves were not helping themselves in terms of fighting sanctions. The sanctions were being fought politically. Our government was trying to negotiate with the sanction senders to appeal to the sanction senders to remove their sanctions. But the truth of the matter is that this fight of sanctions is brinksmanship, where bigger political powers are expecting the smaller political power to bow. You've got the United States, you've got the United Kingdom, you've got Europe, Canada, Australia. There's no way they were going to remove sanctions that they were putting to try and remove the government. There's no way they were going to capitulate and let those sanctions go. So that's when we had to appeal to our government that you've got to legalize the process and stop politicizing. You've got to make it an issue about human rights. You've got to make it an issue about the civilians that are suffering because of these sanctions, because that's illegal in international law and it's a violation of humanity. And now that we've gotten to the point where our government actually has a ruling, the UN has made an announcement, a pronouncement, what it is that they feel about these sanctions. We can now ask African countries, African diaspora, and even people outside the African diaspora to assist us to see these sanctions through. Number one, we need to put pressure on these sanctions because they're immoral, they have no justification, they're illegal at international law, and they're punishing civilians collectively, which is illegal according even to the Geneva Convention. In wartime, you can't do that. So in peacetime, an African country should not be subjected to collective punishment. It is also the punishment of people who have never been put on trial, which is extrajudicial punishment, and it's wrong. And it's an imposition of foreign law, foreign domestic US law, European law, Canada and Australian law being imposed on Zimbabwe as if Zimbabwe is still a colony. So in the name of saying decolonization ended, we need pressure from other Africans, the African diaspora and African diaspora nations to say to the United States, you made the laws in the UN, you created the UN so that international law could be upheld and so that international obligations could be delivered and dispensed. So you are not holding up your end of the bargain, you should hold up your end of the bargain. You created the Human Rights Charter and you're not upholding it. The Human Rights Declaration, and you're not upholding it. You're punishing civilians, you're punishing people without trial, and you're collectively punishing civilians by persecution, depriving them of water, healthcare, and their human rights, which is a crime. That must stop. That kind of pressure, collectively coming from the rest of the world, influencing other international players, will definitely put pressure for the removal of these sanctions, as you can see that the United States is already taking its own.
Okay.
And then furthermore, we also need Africans to assist us with the legal action. According to the resolution that I spoke about, 3413, we can sue for reparations, particularly for our neighbors that have been affected by the displacement of Zimbabwe. We can sue for reparations for the destruction caused by sanctions so that we discourage the use of sanctions in the future, and also so that we can have restoration for the rebuilding of Zimbabwe, which is part of Africa and part of this Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that needs to benefit from Zimbabwe pushing on all cylinders. So we need legal action, we need humanitarian assistance, we need pressure, and we need people to assist us in this legal battle that we undertake.
Very good. It seemed to me, with what you've laid down, the AU should be at the forefront of this fight. What's happening at that end?
The truth of the matter is that Zimbabwe must take leadership. The AU has made pronouncement that it stands with Zimbabwe in fighting these sanctions. The AU has gone to the UN, and all AU countries basically said that sanctions on Zimbabwe must go.
I'm talking about African Union as a body. They should be at the forefront.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. So now that we as Zimbabweans have got the ruling that we've got, We mustn't expect the African Union to understand it. We mustn't expect SADC to understand it until we approach them and actually give them our strategy and our plan and how we think that the way forward should be directed. That is a responsibility for Zimbabwe to give that roadmap. And that is what we need to be doing in Zimbabwe. We're not doing it. One of the major reasons why it's not happening is that in Zimbabwe itself, we've got people not willing to acknowledge the work that's being done by civil society to bring us to the point where we are of depoliticizing the fight and legalizing it. We've got people that are also trying to contest to be the ones that seem like they're the ones that are bringing down the sanctions. And that division, that wanting individualism and individual glory is why we haven't come together as a nation to have a strategy on how we take forward our proposal to the AU on how we want them to assist us and how we want them to back us up. It's the same problem in SADC. The SADC countries are fed up of Zimbabwe with the influence I spoke about, and maybe it's not even the influence I spoke about, they're just tired of Zimbabweans in their country over the past 20 years. It's up to Zimbabwe to go to SADC with a strategy to say these sanctions are almost over. We need you to help us with one more push. We pressure, utilizing the international community. We pressure, talking on the morality and illegality and the violation of human rights. And then we sue as a region for reparations so that you can be restored to the position you were before the refugees from Zimbabwe came in. If SADC and the AU had this plan, understood this, trust me, they would stand with us. And that's what we're trying to promote our government to do, to say, embrace civil society, embrace government officials, embrace the citizens of Zimbabwe, and let's now go to the rest of the community in Africa to tell them how we need their help as a united front with a clear strategy. They will be able to assist them. Having said that, Nkrumah, Africa is compromised. There will be people who go with Zimbabwe. There will be people that will be called to go with the West because the West doesn't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to remove their sanctions because of the immorality. So they will continue to try and push for Zimbabwe to look bad so that they continue to look good. So we've also got to understand that.
Okay, so by your assessment, the fight against the removal of sanction itself is not unified enough.
The fight against the removal of sanctions is not unified enough. It could be more unified. We could have more assistance and support from our government, could have more assistance and support from our business community, more assistance and support from civilians in Zimbabwe. And I won't blame them for not having this unity because our government just has not invested enough money in communication, in getting buy-in, in creating the social engineering that's required for us to get to where we need to get. And I think we need to have a budget in Zimbabwe to actually create this awareness. We also need to do a concrete study that can be given to the AU and SADC, which I think part of the reasons that they can't really participate as aggressively as they can. There is no concrete study giving them measures of what exactly is the impact of these sanctions on Zimbabwe, even though the special rapporteur said it has cost us in excess of 100 billion. I still think that a concrete study is required, and we have been talking about government to do that. And once that's done, then everybody will know the role they need to play. Regional players going to sue for reparations, one side, the businesses that have been affected, those that couldn't come into Zimbabwe, those that couldn't get out of Zimbabwe, investors who couldn't get into Zimbabwe, who couldn't get out of Zimbabwe, and then civil society and civilians and the government, all four need to undertake their own separate legal proceedings. And that's what we need to teach the continent. Because Africa is not used to suing the West. Africa is not used to suing for damages, reparations, or compensation. And we are probably some of the first, together with the Herero people and the Kenyans that ask for reparations for colonialism, who are starting to use this kind of action against the West to hold them accountable for the violation of the human rights of Africans.
Okay, so isn't the talk about suing for reparations premature, considering that the sanctions themselves have not yet been removed, and that talk may even contribute to slowing down the removal of the sanctions?
Well, the more they slow down the removal of the sanctions, the more reparations they owe. That's point number one. Point number two, nothing stops human rights lawyers, international, local, or Zimbabwean, to sue the United States and the Europeans, together with the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, for actually having implemented these illegal sanctions, whether they've been removed or not. We can sue for that. We can also conscientize American businesses, UK businesses, European businesses, and global businesses that were denied access into Zimbabwe in a period in which China took most of the opportunities together with Russia. We can conscientize those business people, those investors, and those companies that they've been deprived their rights to do business freely because of these illegal sanctions. So they should also sue their own governments. So we will only make more noise. We'll only win more people to conscientize people about the legal opportunity. And for those lawyers that like to litigate and make money, the money and opportunity that is here in suing the United States, Europeans, Canadians, and Australians for continuing their violation of African sovereignty and basically abusing African human rights in a crime against humanity. So they can't escape from it. It is illegal. That is now clear. And that illegality is punishable. That illegality is a delict, and that delict can be punished and can also have a seek reparation. So they're not going to be able to hide away from this or to run away from this. The reality is they're going to have to pay, they're going to have to remove their sanctions or incur more penalties at the end of the day.
What's cool, fresh and trendy with a new look? Makes you feel real good, that refreshing vibe. Satisfies you right just the way you like. Do you know? Do you know? Do you know? You ain't gotta do it alone. Specialized makes you flow. Anytime, anywhere. Natural mineral water. Feel different. Think special. This advertisement has been vetted and approved by the FDA.
Let me take you back. What factors precipitated the sanctions, and are those factors still present?
I think it's an unfair question, and I'll tell you why. It's similar to asking a woman who's been raped, what factors contributed to your rape? People who undertake criminality will be criminals without reason. They'll be criminals for the purpose of enriching themselves and aggrandizing themselves. So criminality is not it's not caused by the victim. So that's the first thing I'd like to put on the ground. Secondly, they claimed that there were human rights violations taking place in Zimbabwe. But we all understand that everybody is innocent until proven guilty, and every allegation must be tried through due process so that we can determine whether it's true or not. There was never a hearing. There was never a process, a due process, to test whether those allegations that the Zimbabweans were violating human rights were actually true. And as long as we haven't proved that, any punishment that comes upon anyone who hasn't been given an opportunity to defend themselves and to test the evidence against them will always be an illegitimate punishment. And part of that is what they were blaming the government of Zimbabwe for doing. They were saying that the government of Zimbabwe was persecuting opposition officials and putting them in jail and punishing them without trial. Then they went and they punished Zimbabwe in the same manner, illegally. And we had a debate with the US ambassador and the EU ambassador in Zimbabwe, and they were very clear that there is no due process and there were no trials. And they also ended up making pronouncements that they don't know what that means in international law. So I think that we can throw off the table as an excuse for continuing imperialism or neocolonialism, which the resolution I spoke about earlier on 44/215 actually said that European nations and former colonizers should not use economic coercion or sanctions in order to try and tweak policy and affect policy of their former colonies. And this is what is happening in Zimbabwe. So the reason given is a ruse.
What about the land issues with former colonizers? There's a land dynamic to it. Why don't you tell us about that?
With this interview that we carried out with the US ambassador and the EU ambassador, they dismissed the link. They basically said there is no link between the land issue and the sanctions that are on Zimbabwe. But that is
the
false.
US ambassador said that.
The US ambassador said that. And what is interesting is it was happening on Twitter, on a Twitter space. And the journalist, Hopo Chinwono, who was undertaking this particular debate, has uploaded that Twitter conversation, and he has redacted the part of the US ambassador, because that's how embarrassing it was in diminishing the argument of sanctions. So he actually removed from the entire 6 hours he uploaded on
But do you have a record of that? Do you have a record of that?
I've got a record of that. It's on YouTube. It's on his YouTube page, so I can always give you the link. US ambassador and EU ambassador interview or conversation, Twitter space. I've forgotten what it is, but I will send it to you. And they've redacted the entire section by the US ambassador because he basically proved everything that I'm saying correct. And he basically made pronouncements that, first of all, their sanctions have nothing to do with land, but the ZANU-PF document that actually talks to these sanctions and why they were put by Congress talk about land and the land review. But the US ambassador is saying they don't. And he also said that ZANU-PF itself were not sanctioned. And yet ZANU-PF itself uses the word sanctions in it. So it was an embarrassing affair with the US ambassador.
I mean,
but DNT the EU ambassador was...
DNT will be interested in that video of the ambassador saying that there's no link between the land issues and the sanctions. So we would appreciate it if you provide that to us.
I'll provide it, but remember that part is all redacted. The whole entire 45 minutes with the with the US ambassador embarrassing himself is redacted. And the question we're asking is, why would a journalist redact a record of history if indeed record of history is not an embarrassment and indict to the United States? As for the European ambassador, he just sounded like an idiot. He had no clue what he was talking about. I think this interview with these two gentlemen was the quintessential sign of the incompetence of some of these people that we look at as our former colonizers. They are very incompetent in this.
Okay. But if it's been redacted, then what record do you have to show that it was actually said?
I do have a number of recordings that have been sent by other people that actually prove this, what I'm saying. Some of them might not be whole, but in part, they do actually corroborate what I'm saying. And I'm sure there are people who recorded the entire full account.
And what's the name of that ambassador?
Hastings, Ambassador Hastings, and then there's Tom Olken, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And when did this interview occur?
On the 25th of October.
Of what year?
2001, last year. Just what?
2021.
4 months ago, yes.
Okay. That's interesting development. So now,
and let me tell you what's even more interesting is that once it was had on the day that the UN Special Rapporteur released her report. That's when we had this meeting with the UN, with the EU and US ambassadors. And I was brought in there after having asked Hopo Chinwono to unblock me from his social media page so that I could participate. And he was a good sport in that he said, you're one of, if not the biggest anti-sanctions campaigner in Zimbabwe. You have to be present to ask the questions that you've always wanted to ask the ambassadors. And now imagine, after this embarrassment, we then had the US and the Europeans confirming what we've been saying, confirming what the UN report is saying, and then a week later, the very same journalist, Hopo Chinwono, then begins the campaign against Zimbabweans, giving a group of South Africans, who we call a hate group, an opportunity on his platform to demonize Zimbabweans, to spread hate speech on Zimbabweans, to try and get Zimbabweans removed from South Africa, of course, through violence. And in that conversation, what is interesting is the spokesperson of the Department of International Relations of the South African government was present, also advancing the very same negative statements that go in opposition of what it is that the official South African government's position has been on the Zimbabwe issue.
Okay, so if there's no link between the land issues and the sanctions, then what is on record is the persecution piece that they're claiming, right? To that end, let me ask you, President Emerson Mnangagwa promised to unite the nation. How is he faring in that promise?
Right, so let me link this with your question. So you say, is there no link between the sanctions and the issue of land? There is, because part and parcel of what it is that Emerson Mnangagwa is doing to try and bring the nation together is compensating white farmers for the developments they made on the formerly colonized land. And part and parcel of that is because of a clause that was put in our constitution when it was amended in 2013, based on the duress of sanctions, and part of the conditions that were written by Congress, the Zimbabwe sanctions, on how it is that sanctions can be removed. But what is interesting is that the special rapporteur made a statement about that, where a nation is being forced to undertake reforms to suit illegal sanctions. And she said, no nation can ever be obliged to undertake any reforms that are being enforced by a nation that is interfering with the sovereignty of another and using illegal crimes against humanity like sanctions. So I think that Emerson Mnangagwa is going over and above his mandate to try and unite the nation, including undertaking these kind of actions like compensating white farmers to try and mend relations, hoping that sanctions will be removed. But we are saying that these sanctions have nothing to do with all that. It's all about trying to usurp the sovereignty of Zimbabwe and undertake a coup, so to speak, in the country.
Does your organization support the move by Mnangagwa in compensating the white farmers?
Listen, Mnangagwa is my president. I stand behind him. I might not agree with what it is that he's doing, but we are now saying we have got a number of tools to question whether the decision that he's making is a reasonable decision and a legal decision. If our constitution was created by members of parliament who came into parliament because of calling for sanctions, an illegal act, a crime against humanity, and those members of parliament went into our parliament and made these laws and were part and parcel of the creation of this constitution that actually goes against international law, where we compensate somebody that perpetuated a crime against humanity of colonialism, stole our land, and then we compensate them for developments which should be called vandalism on our land. That is actually contrary to international custom and the precedents that has been set for the Jews, for Europe under German occupation. So we believe that we now have tools to question that decision. And that is a decision we'll question, understanding that our president has been under the duress of sanctions, wanting sanctions to go. We are now saying, should we not review a constitution that was made under the duress of sanctions? Because clearly there was no consensus at the Eden on it. And also, surely as the Zimbabwean people will not opt to compensate people for our land and developments that they made without our authority, yet those people never paid reparations for 90 years of colonialism.
So I read a report, this according to, it says Freedom Report, Zimbabwe's status declined from partly free, which is 29%, to not free, which is 28%, due to the quote, authorities intensifying persecution of opposition figures and civic activists. What's your assessment on this report?
I never pay attention to reports that are written, because first of all, I need to know the source. I need to know how the information was gathered, what was the research question, and what is the sample size that was utilized, who was interviewed. We don't have all that information, so I can't give credence to such a report. And also, any report that comes and seeks to indict a people or a nation without any due process, for me, is problematic, because that's how the Europeans and the West are controlling Africa, by issuing out these reports issued by bogus people and then utilizing them to take unilateral action against African countries. And I think we need to get to a point where these reports, if they are not going to be tested, if they're not going to be put through due process, we actually shouldn't give them any attention.
Okay, that's fine. But what about your own? Is the government persecuting opposition figures?
Well, in my country, we're probably one of the only countries that has got all its urban municipalities being run by a political party that went and called for sanctions, a political party that is partnered with the West to actually destroy the nation, collectively punish the people, into looking for ways to punish the people, to force them to vote for the opposition. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. In South Africa, just in 2019, we saw a political party that says it only stands for Black people, Black land first. And it was barred from partaking in elections because of discrimination against other races other than Black. Now, in Zimbabwe, MDC has been running for elections and winning municipalities utilizing sanctions for the past 20 years. If my country was repressive, that would never be possible, because it's not even possible in America for a company, for a political party that is aligned with the Russians to actually run for elections or to have a sentiment in America. And that's the problem. In MDC say what they want. We've got Hopo Chimono, who will partner with xenophobia, trying to get Zimbabweans to be beaten and to be burnt in South Africa. And he's doing it from Zimbabwe, no one is arresting him. We've gotten to a point in Zimbabwe where the opposition, together with any anti-Zimbabwean activists, have carte blanche and they are not answerable or following rule of law. And we're beginning to question if our government is protecting our sovereignty by letting people like that continue to participate in politics in the name of being given good reviews by the West, and the West continue to give negative reviews because they want ZANU-PF to actually write themselves into a policy that will write them out of power, which is crazy.
Okay, now you live in Johannesburg, right? Do you make frequent trips into Zimbabwe?
Yes, I do. I'm actually due for a trip now. So yes, I do make regular trips to Zimbabwe.
So you being a political figure, you're not, and living outside your country, your stay in South Africa is not considered an exile, is it?
I'm not a politician. I am a civil society organization that is operating from South Africa because I'm exiled in South Africa, or I have become a refugee in South Africa because of the economic conditions in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Zimbabwe. My coming to South Africa happened due to an offer to come and take up a position here. But I probably took up that opportunity because of the things that were happening in Zimbabwe, the economic conditions that are being tightened due to these sanctions.
Okay, you mentioned that you may not agree with President Emmerson Mnangagwa, but you stand behind him. Would you characterize yourself as in alignment with his party, or mostly in opposition to his party?
I'm very aligned to ZANU-PF policy, which is one of the best policies probably in the world. Hence, you see natives being given restoration of their land. Zimbabwe is probably one of the few countries in the world that has addressed the issue of giving natives restitution of what it is that they lost during colonialism, and empowering natives to be the ones that control their natural resources, land, and other rights. That is a policy that I am very pro, because I'm a Pan-Africanist and because I'm an African. The policies of ZANU-PF to intervene in the region militarily, to protect countries like Mozambique from the banditry that was happening in the 80s, to protect Mozambique in order to defeat apartheid in South Africa, and other wars that have taken place in Congo, where Congo could have been bifurcated or split into 5 different nations if it was not for Zimbabwe's intervention there against Rwanda and Ugandan rebels and their official soldiers to bring the Sun City Accord. I think that would have a totally different Southern Africa. Southern Africa is at peace. Southern Africa did not cause an international African world war because of some of the things that Zimbabwe has done. So I support the Zimbabwean government, ZANU-PF's policies. I do not become a member of ZANU-PF because I do think that the policies of ZANU-PF might be excellent, but the personalities in the party are faulty. And the ideological leanings of some individuals in the political party are actually unacceptable and self-serving. And I wouldn't want to be a part and parcel of such. But I absolutely stand behind the policies of the party. I stand behind the president, because as a nation, you need leadership. And the leadership needs followers. And I am a follower, and I accept what it is that leadership says. When I'm not happy with leadership, I've got my ways of airing my grievances without washing the dirty laundry of my country in the public.
Very good. Let's end on Omicron. Omicron started in South Africa. And I noticed that the Western countries were very quick to slap travel restrictions on those countries. And as I speak with you, Omicron is like running wild in the United States. Why is it that they are so quick to slap travel restrictions on us, but not the reciprocal? I mean, you don't see the reciprocity from the African countries.
It's interesting that you bring this issue up, because that issue is related to the issue that we've been talking about the whole afternoon, which is the issue of sanctions. Sanctions are a form of neo-colonialism. It's a form of the West still exerting its control on sovereign African nations so that they continue to be under the control of the West, so that their resources continue to be under the control of the West, so that African countries continue being short of capital, and so that you do not have the ability to develop yourself and to exploit your natural resources. There's been the battle from slavery through colonialism, and now under neo-colonialism, which your former president and namesake Kwame Nkrumah wrote extensively about. So it's about control, and it's about underdeveloping Africa. That's why Omicron was used as a tool to try and stop Africans from traveling and trying to stifle international trade and tourism in Africa, which would affect Africa. And the reason they're doing that is they want to keep Africa dependent. You must be dependent on vaccines for them. You must be dependent on money to keep your countries going, because you're not raising enough taxes, your economic activity is not enough. And my problem is African presidents have not been smart enough to understand this history when they were making their policies. We have no reason to be having the restrictions that the Europeans have, the West have, who have the cases that they have, and we don't have. And you know what is also interesting is that the doctor that discovered this Omicron is actually a Zimbabwean. He's a Zimbabwean doctor based in Botswana. So it is Botswana that discovered Omicron. And then South Africa, being the center with which the Europeans and the West continue to exert their hegemony over, took all the credit for saying that they're the ones that are doing it. It's an institution in Botswana that is actually financed by...
So Omicron was discovered in Botswana, not in South Africa.
It was discovered in Botswana by a Zimbabwean doctor and his team that is actually financed by Harvard.
You have the doctor's name?
Yes, I've got the doctor's name. I've just forgotten it on my tongue right now. But if you, his surname is Sibanda. I'll just give you the name when we're done. But this is the problem, and South Africa took all the credit. And what is interesting is the Omicron was actually traced.
Why would South Africa take credit for a COVID variant, knowing the ramifications that come with it?
They didn't know the ramifications that come with it. Well, there are two theories. South Africa is the white bastion, or the white foothold of white supremacy in Africa at the moment. And so two things could have happened. Number one, South African whites, the whites in South Africa wanted to take the intellectual credit for discovering the variant. That's one option. The second theory says that they discovered this Omicron in Botswana. South Africa then released the information to the world in order to get Africa isolated. Those are the two theories that are there. But at the end of the day, it's all about taking intellectual superiority to its zenith by appropriating intellectual property of other people. So right now, I think it's Jabulani Sibanda. I think the gentleman's name is Jabulani Sibanda. I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong. That gentleman is a Zimbabwean. And nobody wants that Zimbabwean to get credit, because Zimbabwe has been demonized as a country of only bad news. Now, all of a sudden, in the pinnacle of discovering this variant, which actually was traced back to 4 tourists who came into Botswana, and we suspect that they were American embassy officials and military officials, because Botswana has got a military base for the Americans. And so the information of those tourists was never brought out, and we believe it wasn't brought out because the American government officials.
So what is this doctor doing about being shut out like this?
The media is controlled. The media does what we call manufacturing of consent. So if the media does not give him the limelight, the only papers that have given him the limelight...
DNT will give him the limelight. If you get us to him, we'll talk to him.
Yeah, no. His name is Jabulani Sibanda, and I think I will get you in touch with him. And I actually sent you pieces on your platform where we are together, talking about this Jabulani Sibanda. But he can't be given credit, even though Harvard is part and parcel of the process that he was undertaking because he was educated at Harvard. They have allowed the silence on him to continue because he's a Zimbabwean, he's Black. Africans, what do Africans know? They can't be given credit for discovering anything that the West has not discovered. But there is suspicion that Omicron was already known in the West. They didn't announce it because they didn't want more shutdowns. And when the South Africans or Botswanans and the South Africans did it, they were punished for telling the world about this.
This is very revealing. You hid a very important secret towards the end of this interview, but I guess it's partly my fault because I decided to put Omicron at the end of this interview. But Rutendo, you're always amazing. I like your passion. Zimbabwe is really indebted to you because you, in your communication on your platforms and everything, all you talk about it's about sanctions being removed. When the sanctions are eventually removed, you deserve a lot of credit. And also, DNT really appreciate you spending time with us.
Thank you so much. And when the sanctions are eventually removed, I will become less annoying about talking about Zimbabwe. Now I can focus on building Africa. The problem with trying to build Africa right now is that every time I try to build Africa, the question is, but you've got a mess in Zimbabwe. Why would you want to fix the rest of Africa when you as Zimbabwe can't? So I think that is a very sensible argument. So I need to fix Zimbabwe first. We get Zimbabwe right. Then we need to start talking about the rest of Africa, talking about the Congo, talking about France, Afrique, and other countries for us to fix this continent because it definitely needs to be fixed. Otherwise, we're going to go extinct.
So you're saying political leadership is not in the cards for Rutendo Martinharare in the future?
As a Pan-Africanist in this generation, I know that our little borders are part and parcel of why we are suffering. I could never run for office to be confined in Zimbabwe on Zimbabwean issues. It's election cycle that stops people from even thinking about ideas. I can't afford to do that. I need to be serving Africa, serving my country with the rest of Africa, making sure Africa continental free trade agreements are going to benefit each and every African country, eliminate poverty, get us to start innovating, get us to industrialize and start producing our own solution to our own problems.
Well, Rutendo, it's always never a dull moment when you and I talk. Yeah. I really appreciate the revelations on this in this conversation. DNT would like to thank you for stopping by.
Thank you so much. And I want to say to you, our friend, the one who influenced the policy, please thank her. She doesn't admit it to me that she was part and parcel of that, but I know she was.
Wait, she doesn't want her name mentioned in the mix?
I think you and I have discussed that she might have a sensitive role that she plays, that she can't say certain things.
Based on that's very good. Okay.
But what is interesting, Kuruma, is that there were issues you brought about. Like, let's take the sanctions off the civilians off, and then we discuss everything else. And it happened exactly like this. There's an impact assessment happening right now to remove those. And it can't be coincidence. It can't be coincidence after 20 years.
Okay. And I appreciate that DNT was able to help. And I'll be sure to.
I appreciate your help, my brother. And I will always mention you when the accolades are being given. You will be.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I'll send a good message to our mutual friend. All right.
Thank you so much.
If you minia, long live Ghana, man. Long live the baby, man.
One time. So Congo to Jenny Bumpire. So Congo we are fire. I made it ever to you. Ghana made it ever to you. me free Ghana. Me man penny a wodi kano your friend on Dr. Nkrumah. Me mini say na woni my dear na boy your mama. Asemba coupe bi na me ya eya me nwanwa. Here ono na je fan hu die. Ye na raya sasini eya body de ma yen. Moja na no hie gunya de to ho ma yen. Edru me ne wo to say ye be ye bi ato aso tie. Gana de be ye me ne wa. Ya me ne udi na me ya me ne udi a o. Wo so no bi anya bi o. Jankei omwa di diana anampo se bre obiane wo enani ejana enti yemfezi kan ton safangu from na mo frayina kom na yento jomo kanfo ye ho say ye kan na no mo da bi enso wujidi bi di won sam ye nu ne di Ghana city obi apebi yenti na to ye ni greedy abra janka biti baby ananka wo go to ku ibia ye bianko bi ni mi bia wo nya wo na wasu wonya rene hu si ma ba ko yente free aso sa nanku tie ken nan so wo ko parliament akona ko anazo say mundu to me kam ko to ma power me fa janka ko ya ba wana say maza bibia wo me fango shabun samtawa anya sana koti power when one go try a bank wa when me nyansa se enye ba na ye kasa kwa omeyi ye ya don in power ye sumuntie ngana man